Gabor Mate, one of our favorites. Children need to know that they matter. And human beings have a need to be connected with others. And Stephen Porges talked about safety is an absence of danger, an absence of threat, plus a feeling of connection. And I think that's something that's quite poignant as we move through COVID and lockdowns and opening up and different things. For me, I'm pretty safe here in my place where I live by myself. I'm out in the country, so nobody else is ever in my immediate area. And yet, if this is all I had, I wouldn't really feel connected with anybody. And I really notice now that I'm not allowed to see my family right now. I live alone, so I have that going on. And so we have this need to be connected with others, and we also have experiences that say it's not safe. So we have that dual experience going on. So I wanted to start today by looking at if you're an outsider within your family. And it could happen through a variety of ways. The designated difficult person, I laughed when I heard that several years ago. It's the one in the family that's just not like the others. It might be the one that has the fight response and everybody else is kind of going along with it. It might be the one who's an artist. It might be the one who's scapegoated for naming the truth in the family, who won't keep the big lie of the family. Or it could be something like you're a different race through adoption. That must be really tough to be a person of color, for instance, in a white family, which would be the most common one. You might be a gay person, queer, in a heterosexual family. And even if they celebrate you, you're not quite the same. And some families do a better job at celebrating diversity than others. And maybe it's an intellectual, athletic thing. You might be an athlete, or you might be an intellectual, but the rest of your family is the other way. So sometimes people have a feeling. I know when I was a child, I thought, I think maybe I was adopted because I just don't feel like I'm like the rest of the people in my family. And I've heard other people say the same. So this is fairly common, and there's lots of reasons for it. And then sometimes we share being an outsider with our family. So everybody in our family is the outsider in the dominant culture. So it might be this flag of independence in Scotland trying to get their independence from England. And so the Scottish people are a variety of races, historically white. And so it's not based on racial, it's based on a country or a culture. So there's some of that. Neil Patrick Harris, Doogie Howser always comes to mind. He and his family, his partner, and their 2 adopted children are a queer family in a predominantly heterosexual culture. And I suspect that the culture that they move in, that's pretty accepted, probably more so than if you lived in a ranch in Montana or something like that. And you might be the token person of color in a predominantly white group, the immigrant family of color in a white suburb. There's a lot of ways that people are an outsider. The whole family's an outsider. And so we have these multiple designations and interests. And it's difficult when we can feel accepted in one culture, but not in our family. And so if you're a family that you share racial discrimination, then it's very much more important that you are included in the family. But if you're also gay, or there's something else about you that kind of sets you apart, then you don't get to rely on your family in quite the same way. So we always want to find our people. And partly this is evolution. We seek the safety and acceptance. We don't want to be shamed or excluded. We have all of these different subcultures or groupings that we feel comfortable in and others that we don't feel comfortable in. So sometimes we're an insider and sometimes we're an outsider. And we express or suppress parts of ourselves depending on who we're with. So I notice that all the time, sometimes with a gay man. I used to work at an AIDS organization in the 80s and 90s, and they'd really camp it up with each other. There's a certain way that they talk to each other. And that was just part of what they could express when they were together with other people who would understand. But if they were in a different kind of environment, if I met them at the grocery store or something, it wouldn't be quite the same. Some of that's just natural. We just express things with people that we feel comfortable around. And lots of gay people move to big cities. I certainly did the same. I moved from the north to a big city in the south when I was coming out, partly because I didn't want to be around my parents when I was doing that. It was a small town. I'd had a lot of history with that as a teenager of being shamed, and I didn't want to have that happen in the same little town I was in. And when you move to a big city, you can more likely find people who are like you. And then some of the more subtle things, we talk about this quite a bit. When we're around other people who understand trauma, we feel like we can be more of who we are and we can express ourselves and not have to worry that we're going to be misunderstood. And so, others who are doing this deep personal work and who really have a pretty good understanding of the basics of trauma and the nervous system, we feel like these are our people. We feel like we have something in common and we're understood there. And so, that's a nuance that most people might not think of when we think about being an outsider. So before we go into the inquiry, just a reminder to attune to your body. Relax all the tight spots, soften your belly, and take some breaths. And as you're staying conscious and aware in this moment, then you can do the inquiry. If you find that you're getting off kilter, it's getting too intense, open your eyes, look around the room again, establish that you're safe, do some tapping, and then notice the sensations in the body. What are those sensations doing here? And the whole practice is to be aware that we don't have to be perfect. These might bring up some difficult memories, and can we be kind and compassionate with ourselves and with others? But primarily that starts with ourselves. So just to keep coming back to, hold your own hand, take a few deep breaths, really stay present as you're doing the inquiry. So if you are an outsider in your family, and if you think back to when you were a child, your family of origin is often very powerful. Or it might be that you're feeling like an outsider in your family right now. Let yourself kind of bring up a few of those experiences where you felt that way. Maybe you felt shamed or excluded, you just didn't fit in. And notice your body. What does it feel like right now in your body as you're bringing up those memories? Stay attuned to your breaths. And we'll give this a few minutes so that you have time to bring forward. Just kind of notice it in your body, notice what we're looking at. I was an outsider in my family. In whatever way that came up for you, if it's something we've already discussed or something a bit different, let yourself feel into that. Keep your breath moving. And how is it you know that? What's your evidence for that? And it doesn't have to be evidence that will convince a jury, just whatever comes to mind. How do you know? What are some of the experiences where you felt that way? And remember that we're witnessing, we're observing, we're not back in that situation. So sometimes we can just sit with it and watch. Other times we might get kind of dragged into it a bit more intensely. Do some tapping, open your eyes, do some focus shifting or put it on the wall, the image, the memory on the wall on the other side of the room. And look as well as what beliefs did you form about yourself? Did this feel like, well, everybody else in my family got along okay? It must have been my fault. I was just never very coordinated. I was always stumbling over my feet. Everybody else was naturally graceful. They'd go for a run and I'd stay home. What beliefs did you form about yourself? Usually there's something broken. This happened to me because I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't funny enough. I wasn't lucky enough. And then let's look at another nuance of this. Part of what happens when we're in a family where we don't feel like we're all in sync, maybe you were the one included and somebody else wasn't. So there's certain things that we know about being in those situations. One is that siblings in a family where there was a bully rarely stand together. They don't want to be targeted. People feel helpless when that's going on. And we know this from larger culture too. Women betray other women. We see the cost of being in an oppressed group and we're scared that'll happen to us. So we look at the other way. It's hard to stand up to injustice, whether it's in our own home or out in the world. And one of the ways that we avoid really being present for that is we minimize it. Well, it can't be that bad, or we just don't think about it. That's one of the ways that privilege works. We don't have to think about it. It doesn't affect us directly. And so often we'll retroactively judge ourselves. So if you look back at something that happened in childhood and you think, well, I should have stood up for my older brother or my little sister or whatever it is, the one that dad targeted. Or maybe they should have stood up for me. But how could you have done that when you were a child? So don't retroactively go back and feel ashamed because you didn't have the strength to fix something. Or maybe you really tried, but it didn't actually fix it. And so now we feel this sadness and grief, but we might also feel guilt and responsibility. So one of the things that we know about childhood is that the children don't have the power. So see if you could keep that in mind. And so, with that, let's go into this next step of the inquiry. If you are not the outsider, and you could apply this in your family, you could apply it to, if you're heterosexual and you have someone who's a friend who's a gay person, or whatever it might be. If you're the white person with that person of color who is a friend, what might it feel like? See if you could just put yourself in their shoes. What might it feel like if you were the outsider in that situation? If you weren't the golden child in the family, but instead you were the scapegoated one. What experiences would you have had as that one, as the outsider, that are different from what you had? Most of us have experience on both sides of this, being the outsider and being the insider. So right now we're just looking at it from that insider position, thinking about the one who was the outsider. And what do you suppose they believed about themselves based on some of those experiences? If your parent had always been really critical of your report card instead of praising it, whatever it is that comes up. Let's give this a minute to really feel into that and stay present. Stay with your breath, your body. Remember that we're doing an inquiry, we're doing a practice. Notice your breath, keep your breath moving. Notice your heart. What are the emotions that are here? What are the sensations in your body? And then let's go into activating our love neural networks. So to put your hand on your heart if you want, and to use any combinations of words. It might include some of these or be completely different. I am willing to cultivate being open-hearted, kind, connected within and with others like me. I'm willing to release judgment for what I was not aware of and not strong enough to do. You could vividly imagine what it is you're bringing forward. It might be that you do something differently in the family when one of the kids was being picked on, that you maybe comfort them later in their room instead of shying away or whatever it might be. And you could see yourself doing that. And notice your open heartedness. It's not always there. Oftentimes we get by with dissociating or ignoring or neglecting or just turning away. So being open hearted, being willing to cultivate that is a big deal. Notice your breath. And if you want, bring someone into your heart center. Might be someone from the inquiry, you for sure. Maybe bring someone else into. And immerse both of you in the heartfelt wish to be happy, to be included, even if it's just the two of you. Wish for them the blessing of being included, and wish that for yourself as well. Let yourself really feel into that. I'm connected and at peace. It's safe to be me. And again, stay connected with your body, your breath. You don't have to do this perfectly or any certain way. Use all of your senses to really bring this alive. Let your shoulders relax so your heart center can be kind of spacious. Let yourself rest there.